on this special program from Boston Lanka. It is our pleasure that we would join with Mr. M.A. Sumanthiran, Member of Parliament from the Tamil National Alliance. And as we know, Mr. Sumanthiran is a senior politician and a very active member in the opposition. And also he's a senior lawyer. We are glad that we could join with him through our correspondent, Boston Lanka correspondent in Sri Lanka, Varuna Sumanthiran. Mr. Sumanthiran, thank you for joining with us. And let me get to this question, directly, Mr. Sumanthiran. As you know, the present situation in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is almost a bankrupt state. And as we know, right now, the country is almost locked down. And as we know, many blame for the present government, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But people also lament about the lack of leadership in general among parliamentarians, among those who governed for so many years. Not only those who govern, but also work as members of the parliament. As a senior parliamentarian, what is your view about the present situation, and also what got us to this situation and ways that we can get out of this situation?
Thank you for inviting me to speak to Boston Lanka on the current crises that are faced by Sri Lankans here. We are facing an unprecedented crisis. People are queuing on the streets for months now for cooking gas, for fuel. There is shortage of food, medicine. Prices have skyrocketed. And in the midst of this, there is also serious political changes that people want. Naturally, because this state of affairs was brought about by the current regime. When I say current regime, it's the SLPP. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa being mainly responsible for this issue, having promised in his election manifesto itself that he will bring about serious tax cuts. And when that was announced in his manifesto, the finance minister at that time, Mangala Samaravira, who is no longer with us, predicted this state of affairs. He said Sri Lanka will become like Lebanon and Venezuela and suffer debt crisis like Greece, and we are there. So it wasn't without warning. It was known, and the impact of those tax cuts was huge, to the point that international credit agencies downgraded us, and that was a cause for us not being able to borrow any more to pay our debts. Now, in this crisis, people generally blame all parliamentarians. People say, well, this is not something that happened right now. This was long time coming, mismanagement and so on. There is some truth to it. Governance issues are the ones that have caused the country to come to this state of affairs. Corruption is another major factor. And not planning, not being wise in the way that we spent our monies have all brought us to this situation. But the immediate trigger was the decisions by the current president and the government that was put in August 2020. The opposition for its part has said that, well, we will take over government if the ones who are responsible for this step down. I think that's a reasonable request. You don't ever keep the person who made a major blunder like this. The president has even admitted to this blunder, to his chemical fertilizer policy, for delaying going to the International Monetary Fund. Now, if you admit that those were failures, those were huge failures, the next line of his communication should have been, therefore I resign. He hasn't. So, keeping that same people, there has been some change when Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned, but it's the same party in power. Only change is that the Prime Minister has changed. Nevertheless, the same regime is in place, and it's nigh impossible for anybody to come in and join that government. So people blame the opposition parties for not joining this government. This government can't be joined. This government must move aside and allow others to take over. If that happens, then I think there will be a very serious turnaround in the prospects for the country. When changes started happening in Sri Lanka, one of the promises that were given was that the 20th Amendment to the Constitution that was brought about by the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime will be repealed, and that we will go back to the 19th Amendment as a first step. In point of fact, the President has given this assurance. The last address to the nation, he did say that he will immediately bring the 19th Amendment back and thereafter commence discussions on the abolition of executive presidency. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, soon after he took over, when he addressed the nation, he said the same thing, but he also said the executive presidency would be abolished as a second stage. However, this amendment that the government has now proposed, which is numbered 22nd Amendment Bill, because the main opposition party also has submitted a bill, and that is numbered 21A. The government is not even going anywhere near the 19th Amendment. It's far less than what the 19th Amendment accomplished. Even the 19th Amendment is a very, very diluted version, because if one remembers the promise given by Maithripala Sirisena at the time of his election, he agreed to abolish executive presidency, but do it in two stages, like what this government has been saying, that first do something that would not require a referendum. So that was the first dilution. Secondly, when the matter went to the Supreme Court struck down a few things and said, you need a referendum for this. So that was the second dilution. Then third, when it came to Parliament, only 47 MPs were in the government, others were all in the opposition. So in order to accommodate the opposition and to get 150 votes, all manner of compromises were made. So that was the third dilution. So 19th Amendment itself is a very diluted version. It really did not affect the executive presidency in any significant way. Now, what the Minister of Justice has now gazetted is worse than that. It's more diluted than that. Not only that, even where it seeks to bring down the presidential powers vis-a-vis Parliament, it says that it will not apply to the 9th Parliament, the current Parliament's term, which properly translated would mean it won't apply to Gotabaya Rajapaksa's tenure in office. Now, the people of the country want Gotabaya Rajapaksa to go. Gota, go home is a primary call. In that there are many messages, and one is personal to him, that he must move. Secondly, the powers of the executive president that he wields. Now, on both counts, 21st Amendment is not just an eyewash, but actually a fraud on the people, because the promise was that at least the 19th Amendment would be restored. But here, as long as Gotabaya Rajapaksa is president or during this parliament, he will retain all of his 20th Amendment powers and continue to be in office for his full term. So that is not what the people have been asking. That was not what was promised at all. And so that's a fraud on the people.
Now, Mr. Sumanthiran, what is your assessment about the performance of the present Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe? He came as somebody who could somehow get the country out of this mess, or somebody who could get through to the international community and somehow get those dollars that we desperately seek. Do you think he has done well, or has he miserably failed? What's your view?
When Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe took over that post, there was a lot of expectation, because naturally he is the most experienced person in Parliament, not just an experienced parliamentarian, but 5 times Prime Minister. No one can match his experience in any way at all. So he has become Prime Minister 6th time. But the issue here is that he wasn't even elected by the people. He got in several months after the election using one nationalist slot that his party got. And he is a single UNP MP. He does not even have one other person in his party in Parliament. So the President strategically chose him to be Prime Minister because he has no support, he has no power in Parliament. He has to rely entirely on the President's party, the SLPP, which even after defections still commands a simple majority in Parliament, a comfortable simple majority in Parliament. So Ranil Wickremesinghe is not able to do anything that the SLPP does not approve. Of course, in negotiations with IMF and other internationals, he can use his skill, and that was what was expected. But now that almost 2 months is coming up from the time he took over office, and we haven't seen any change. The IMF that just issued a statement has again confirmed that even a staff level agreement will not be forthcoming until debt restructuring is done. And we know the challenges with debt restructuring. We haven't even started on that yet. So the pain that the country has to go through is going to continue for a longer period of time, and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has failed to turn that around.
Now, a few days back, the presidential task force appointed by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa under the leadership of Venerable Galpadu Gnanasara had handed over their recommendations or their report to the President. And I understand that they had many recommendations, and one that was on the media was that to release all those LTT suspects that were held for a long time. Maybe that's one of the request or one of the demands of TNA as well. Do you think these recommendations, or at least what they are trying to do, is it in the right direction to bring national harmony, national unity in Sri Lanka?
We saw in the media yesterday that Venerable Gnanasara, as chairman of a presidential task force, has handed over a report of his task force called One Country, One Law. Now, right from the word go, we objected to this task force and its theme. This is one country, no doubt, But one law does not apply to all peoples of this country. This is a multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious, a plural society. And in keeping with that, the customs of different people's groups are recognized in our law. And so there is a Muslim law, there is Tesa Balama, there is Kandyan law, there used to be applicable another law called the Mukkuwa law, and the general residual law, which is a Roman Dutch law, in addition to English law applying in many areas of activity. Now, we have a rich sources from which we draw our law, and to make all of that into one single law would be doing violence to the multicultural plural society. If by one country one law is meant that all are equal, then that's most welcome. But that was not the intention of this task force. Apparently, in the report, they have recommended that the Tamil political prisoners be released. Now, that will be a very welcome move if the President acts on it and releases them. We have been calling for their release for 12 years now after the war ended, because those are people who may have been involved in some illegal activity during a time that they prosecuted a particular political objective of that of a separate state. Now, that political objective is no longer there. And that is why we call them political prisoners, because they did not do any of those things in pursuance of personal objectives. But for 12 long years, some of them have not been released. During the last government, we managed to negotiate and have about over 100 people released. Now, the balance are also released. That will be most welcome. But that is different to the task force's main function of trying to assimilate all the different peoples who live in this country into a homogeneous society.
Mr. Sumanthiran, we want to thank you very much for your time. And I know these are difficult times for people in Sri Lanka. And also, I'm sure the challenging times for parliamentarians like you. And we wish you all the best. And we thank you for this time again. And hopefully we'll have another conversation with you soon. Thank you.